Welcome to Abbey Road for the third in our series of Universal Music Open Days. My name's Miranda Sawyer and I'm very happy to be here because this is undoubtedly one of the most famous music studios in the world, and we have deliberately chosen to come here because the subject under discussion tonight is sound. For the many thousands of artists who've passed through this studio, sound is more than important. It's vital, the living heartbeat of what they do. They make a wonderful noise and they want it captured, enhanced, made the best it can be. As anyone who's ever sat in on a mixing session knows, all musicians have a kind of dog hearing. They sit like this, able to spot an audio tweak imperceptible to us mere mortals. But what's the point of all this agony, this desire for audio perfection, if once the recording is mastered, the track is put out into the world as an MP3, to be listened to on a mobile phone with cheap earphones? Consumer desire for convenience, for the ability to have any music you want, anywhere you want, has shaped the music market in recent years. Where have all the sound snobs disappeared to? They're sitting in a darkened room, weeping to a vinyl copy of Dark Side of the Moon, played through Wharfedale speakers in quadraphonic sound. Whilst the new generation is out wrecking their ears and everyone else's mood by playing tinnitus through their earbuds to the entire bus. But there are indications that things are about to change. Dave Grohl's new film about LA's Sound City Studios has Stevie Nicks, Tom Petty, Rick Rubin getting sentimental about an old analog desk. And he makes the same points, that convenience has made us forget the joys of sound. Beats founders Dr. Dre and Dimi Iovine spent years getting the sound on their Beats headphones right. And we heard from Luke from Beats at this event last year. DJs are demanding better quality audio on services such as Bleep, Beatport and 7 Digital, which all use FLAC rather than MP3. Aura Stream, a new digital service, is deliberately marketing itself as an HD quality streaming service. And serious audiophile companies are bringing out products which allow us to hear good quality sound through our TVs without needing a physics degree to hook up the equipment. But will such offers bust the bank? Can they be portable and convenient? And are music fans actually interested in good quality sound? To answer some of these questions, I'll be talking to this beautiful panel here. Aren't they lovely? First up, we have Ben Hillier, who's ace producer, who knows a little bit about sound from working on albums from Blur to Elbow in his own recording studio. We have Mike Smith, who many of you know is president of music at Mercury, and his A&R track record is nothing short of extraordinary. He signed White Stripes, PJ Harvey and Arctic Monkeys when he was at EMI Publishing, and MGMT, The Gossip, and Mark Ronson when he was at Columbia. And since moving to Mercury, he's signed The Stripes, which we're going to hear from later, which I'm really excited about. We also have, well, I'm going to start down there, because I'm going to do you last, JJ. Jonathan Allen, who works here at Abbey Road as a senior engineer and producer, and he's just won a BAFTA for his work on Les Miserables, but he forgot to bring it, which is really annoying, because we could have stroked it and everything. And then JJ, here we have JJ, who I've written it all down on another piece of paper. JJ's been on both sides of the glass in the recording studio. He had a recording contract in the mid-70s. He created the drum machine, which was used on Sweet Dreams, and built recording equipment. When he was at Orange, he won an award for the Best Music App of the Year and created one of the first music download services to run on a 2.5G cellular network back in 2004, which is pretty good. Now, at Dolby, he evangelizes to content owners and service providers about the benefits of delivering media to consumers using Dolby formats. And if you want to try, there's a bit of kind of a Dolby corner over there. And finally, over here, sitting down, but we do love him, but he's just there, is Pete Downton, who's director of Imagination, which supplies technology into some of the world's largest hardware brands, including Apple, Samsung, and Sony. And Imagination also owns Pure, which produces DAB radios, internet radios, streaming devices, and set-top boxes. So Pete will come up in a bit to talk us through some recent data, and then we'll have the panel. But first up, we're going to hear something to get us in the mood. And I'm about to do something I haven't done for years. This may take some time. Look, people, it's a record player. Okay, right. It really might take me some time. Right, here we
go.
Over here.
I'll stand over here so I don't hide these beautiful people. Before I start bringing the mood down by showing some bar charts, what I wanted to do was to show you some video clips of real music fans outside real gigs that Universal have been capturing over the last couple of weeks. So, perhaps.
I've got a docking station for the iPad, so I just plug that in and turn that up loud.
Mainly using YouTube and Sennheiser HD 360 headphones and my iPod as well.
I'm not so technical. Just my iPod, Apple headphones, the standard stuff.
iPod mainly. I mainly listen on sort of commute, so I usually use over-the-head sort of earphones. I guess Beats, but really anything.
Spotify with Penguin earphones.
Spotify as well, and I got it on my iPhone and listen to it at work and the little earphones, the standard iPhone ones actually.
Generally listen to them on my Mac computer, stream it from Spotify or just download tracks from iTunes.
I think it's the convenience of having like those MP3 players, because like CDs, who carries the CD around unless you have a Walkman, but they don't sell those anymore. Sometimes when you listen to music, like when it gets really like deep, like the speakers, like cheap speakers start to give in and like you hear like weird sounds, but like now you don't hear any of that, you just hear the deepness of like a double bass, for example.
Beats by Dr. Dre, and they're decent, I like the bass on them. And then just normal computer speakers, which I was looking at buying some more expensive ones, and I found some good ones, but £80 was a bit too much for me to, yeah.
Cheap ones, ones that cost like £2. I'm not so bothered about it as long as I can just listen like easily.
The bigger ones definitely crisper and they like really vibrate as bass comes on. They're more comfortable, the sound just, I don't know, it feels more organic, kind of, less tinny. I guess the higher end is just a lot more dynamic. You can really hear the different elements of the song, different instruments and stuff, whereas, yeah, the cheaper, like the worse stuff, it's just a lot more monotoned.
Okay, so that last clip, I guess, confounds conventional wisdom in many respects. If you talk to anyone who spent any of the last 10, 15 years working around digital music, they'll tell you that the quality of the audio is really not important to people listening to music services today. The reason for my business it's important that we're here today and doing everything we can to try and encourage those who create with those who distribute to come together is that in the next 12 months our technology will appear in about 1 billion devices that ship to the market. 1 billion devices, 1 billion new either handsets or smartphones, smart TVs or set-top boxes or networked audio speakers. And the pace at which this market is developing is so dramatic and profound that probably for the first time in history, there's an opportunity not to build a market from the niche into the mainstream. It's to deliver to the mainstream day and date music. And so the statistics here, frankly, from my perspective, are some of the most encouraging statistics I've seen in the last decade or so of working around digital music. For my sins, I'm a recovering record company executive. I spent 12 years at Warner Music Group, and my first dalliance with HD audio was around DVD audio. And the concept there was building an audience to experience music how the artist intended it to be created, but there was a price tag of entry which was about $1,000 there or thereabouts. And there was also competing formats. Now what we're looking at is a marketplace where this is the UK population research that's been done over the last 5 or 6 days, showing what is the most important device used today for listening to music. And I did this research in a different exercise about 6 months ago, and the jump to 27% choosing the mobile device is the most profound change I've seen in any statistic in 15 years of research in this space. It is absolutely night and day, and the thing that's driven that is not necessarily the change in devices, but the change in the amount of services being offered to consumers. So we really are seeing, and not least demonstrated by the statistics showing growth return to the music industry in the last week, which is great, and it's happened after I left the industry. I joined in '97 when it started going the other way. So, but then if you look at the next few device categories, radio, hi-fi, CD, car stereo, and car stereo, you see that they're all categories of devices that today are not connected. And so we're going to see a real transformation, predominantly not connected. There are a few high-end cars. If you live in that world and you can afford that car, you probably have got IP connectivity today, but most people haven't. We're going to see a revolution going through those device categories too, all of which have got the ability to receive updates and that support the kinds of quality of format that we're talking about today. Now, if we move to the next slide, even more profound. When we're looking at the 16 to 24-year-olds, the kind of people that we've just been looking at the videos around, you see that mobile totally dominates their music listening. Absolutely dominates it today. So you have a destination, you have a point to deliver services to these customers today that's never existed without the need to figure out retail, figure out marketing strategies. And so I think this is a very unique opportunity for the industry to work together. And when I say the industry, I'm talking about the technology industry, the service providers working in concert with those who are delivering catalogues. Moving on to the next slide. Well, it's no surprise, really, when you ask that same, well, the group who are saying that the mobile device is either the first, second, or third most important device for them. When they're asked how they're actually listening to this, well, you see that predominantly, in terms of this is the whole market, it's about headphones. So the graphs there show quite clearly, often is the dark sector, that sometimes is a second, and then grey is never. So you see that headphone, even when you look at the entire population, dominates that. You see car stereos, and you see some in-device speakers. So the quality of audio in laptops is starting to be more important to consumers. But when we start looking at that next generation of music listeners, you see headphones totally dominates that. So it's a personal experience, and it's also starting to see that part of that device, I guess, solution is in the marketplace, and people are choosing to upgrade to a better quality of experience. But it also shows huge potential if you look at some of those other categories, particularly wirelessly linked to speakers, which, I think alongside Beats and the success of Beats, I think the success of Sonos really does demonstrate that there's a place on the high street for audio products, despite the fact that they've been somewhat, I guess, pushed to the back of the stores in the last decade or two. Moving on, we start to see some of the early signs that demonstrate what that's creating in terms of market opportunity. So if you look at the growth of the UK headphones market between 2011 through to 2016, you start to see that this is a real marketplace. And now, of course, this is aggregate. I mean, statistics that show the entire population, by their very nature, tell you everything and tell you nothing, because everyone's experience and everyone's needs are different. But if you look at the growth in terms of the average retail price, you can certainly see that people value audio and sound sufficiently to be prepared to pay more for it year on year on year. In a marketplace that's seen the cost of buying audio equipment going down dramatically for the last 20 years as it's been kind of marginalized in retail stores. Moving further on, asking how people are connecting their music services and how they're listening to it. So you see that built-in speakers are preferred when listening to music on a laptop. It still astonishes me whenever I see this same question being asked, just the amount of people who are listening to music on their laptops. So the convenience that gives them is satisfying a need, but in most instances, a certain amount of quality is being, I guess, been given away in order to get that convenience. And working in technology and seeing the power of the devices that are hitting the street in huge volumes today, there's absolutely no need to make that trade-off. It's a false trade-off between convenience and quality today. Our business spends most of its time helping people create great graphical experiences in games and great video experiences. And actually, it's only the last 18 months where people have really been coming to us and asking to help them give better audio experiences. So we're starting to see through our customers that there's a real pull, consumer pull for better audio experiences. Moving on, if you go down to that 16 to 24 demographic again, you see that built-in speakers really dominates this together with headphones. So we know that irrespective of the quality of the source file, and we've talked about that in a little detail already in terms of the introduction, it's not an optimum playback experience, and so we're not giving we're not giving, certainly this generation, the ability to experience better. And I guess, I guess the question is, would they care? Moving forward, what are people listening to? Now this, they're listening to a personal digital library predominantly. They're listening to streaming services. And again, I think this mirrors what we saw in the mobile statistics. Tremendous growth in any numbers I've seen previously. But also I think the YouTube figure, I spent a lot of time looking at the radio industry. And for the 16 to 24 age group in particular, YouTube has started to be the place where they listen to music most frequently. That's how they discover, that's how they share playlists. And so again, if you think about the context in which that's being experienced, you know that it's not the optimum audio experience that they're receiving. Moving on, again, sorry, this is the younger demographic which really takes that YouTube number for the total population and shows you just how dramatic that is. This one I think is again, I think one of those stats that comes back and just makes you smile and thinks, I think it was the football manager, Shankly, said it's not the despair that hurts, it's the hope. And often over the last 15 years, you've kind of seen the next wave of innovation coming around technology and you've thought, maybe this is it. But it's clear that many of the 16 to 24-year-olds that everyone talks about snacking on singles, they're still choosing to listen to full albums. And so I think that again is very encouraging for certainly people sat around the panel there who are working on creating these contiguous works of art. It tells you that there is an audience for that today. Certainly there's a potential to get an audience to really engage with that form of art. So, trying to explain what, and I'll leave some of the narrative around this to JJ from Dolby just because I like to leave him a hard question. Part of what we're saying here is, look, if this is the experience, listening experience today in a studio, how much of that is finding its way through to those people listening to YouTube or music services with their headphones bought at the local store? Well, if that's what you start with, this is what they're hearing. And I think, again, many people say, certainly people that I speak to who come from a technology background, who are really just looking at units, say, well, does that matter? Do people care? Well, again, I think it's probably worth looking at that similar group of music-going fans over the last few weeks who were asked, first of all, do they know there's anything else out there? Is there anything else out there for them to choose? And then secondly, do they care if there is?
Well, I've heard of like FLAC, but it doesn't work on iTunes, and so I haven't actually listened to it, but I've heard of it. Well, when I try and like download music off like before Pirate Bay closed down, they used to have FLAC options and MP3, and so I download like FLAC maybe first, and then I tried it on iTunes and it didn't work, so I just resorted to MP3. Well, I like to appreciate not just vocals but like instruments as well, and I find like high quality stuff, always like to include the instruments as well.
Probably not. I'm not a big connoisseur, so as long as it's adequate enough for me to listen to it and, you know, get all the lyrics and not to have like a weird kind of sound in the background, it's fine.
But if there's classical music or something, I want to get the full range out of it because it is a good song. I want to give it what it deserves. Occasionally I'll download FLAC files. I don't notice as much different with CDs. I used to listen to vinyl when I was really tiny, so sometimes I miss that, but between CDs and regular MP3s, I don't notice too much of a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it would be something that I spend most of my time listening to music, so I'd really like that. Yeah, just because as someone, I love music and it's what I do. If you can put as much sort of quality and as much sort of expertise into making it sound brilliant, then that's always something that I'd love.
Because you can access so many streaming services online there now, that is really good in terms of accessing the music. And maybe it's just the quality of the actual sound that is just lacking behind a little bit at the moment. So if you could marry those two together, then it would be a really good outcome.
I'd like to think that musicians would put more into the sound quality, and obviously the manufacturers of music systems would also put the same amount of money in, I'd hope.
With that, no more bar charts. I'll hand over to the panel.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, so there were some really interesting stats there. And looking at them, it seemed to me that it looks like we've got an entire generation of music fans that we could call lost, who don't really care about sound quality. They're so used to hearing kind of rubbish sound quality coming out through their laptop speakers. They haven't actually ever heard proper, in inverted commas, audio. Do you think we can win them back? Should we just let them go? What do you think?
If you don't mind me going first.
We don't mind,
I'm
Joe.
going to quote a fantastic research fellow that Dolby employs, Dr. Poppy Crum. She was a sound recorder first. That's a real name. And I was asking her in advance of this session some poignant questions about listening, because she fellowship studied audio perception in partially hearing people. She's researched that the youth of today are genetically wired to take lossy codecs and accept that as the norm. And when you play them HD, high quality audio, they can't hear the difference.
But that's not because they've been bred like that. That's because...
That's all they've ever heard.
Yeah.
That's all they've ever heard. And you've also got to take into fact the other factors. You know, there's a percentage of the population do have a hearing defect, and some people are on medication, which does affect your hearing, or they've had a drink. Not that kind of medication.
Not if they're 12.
Not if they're 12. I take aspirin for my heart, and that affects my high-end hearing. So people may not have had the opportunity to listen to high-end audio, high-quality audio.
What about the rest of the panel? What do they think about that? Have we lost these poor kids who've never heard decent music sound?
Well, I did a little bit of research before I came.
Yeah, great. Well done. Everyone's done research. This is good.
Yeah, a bit of homework. And I found a study that said that that they played MP3s and various quality MP3s and high quality WAV files to listeners, and they found that the people who were used to MP3s preferred MP3s. So they're technically the WAV files are better quality, that you can hear everything, it's a sound as it should be, but it's like, I guess it's similar to people growing up eating white sliced bread, and then you give them your brown artisan baked something, and it's not
tastes
their thing.
rubbish.
They just don't like it. And I think to a certain extent people have a taste for it. I think we need to be aware that we have to have a more holistic approach to the sound quality throughout the industry. The industry cannot survive making poor quality music because it's not valued. If you deliver a poor quality recording in a poor quality format to consumers, it's not worth anything. It's not, they'll get the song to a certain extent, but they won't. Other research has shown that they don't listen to it in depth. They don't listen to it more than a couple of times. We need people that are going to love music, as we all do, and the reason we're here, I should imagine. And in order to do that, we have to feed the high end of the market. We have to start there. It's easy to do the poor quality stuff. But yeah,
We've got to be in the markets of re-listening. That's how Catalogue was based. And I just don't think some of the levels...
Of re-listening, so you want to...
Re-listening, loving your tracks, it's the re-listening that makes you fall in love with something. And to grow with something. And actually, let's face it, a lot of if you've got this assault on the ears, you don't love it, you just move on. And I think that's a big, big factor.
You can be wowed by it in the short term, but then you don't go and necessarily buy it.
Well, I think people have become almost addicted to a very quick sugar high from listening to music, and that's why the track market is so popular, and the singles market, well, the track market, is so successful in the UK, and the albums market has fallen away quite singularly. It's much more difficult, I think, to listen to most contemporary albums because they're recorded in such a way that it's very much built for radio, and it's a very bright, intense listening experience. It's not an easy listen in the way that listening to records in the 70s and 80s was.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I mean, I think that sometimes some tracks are kind of let down by the way that they're recorded. And I had to make a playlist recently for my son's birthday. He's young, and he wanted like Dizzy Rascal and Tiny Temper and Michael Jackson. Downloaded them all. And the Dizzy Rascal and the Tiny Temper tracks, when we turned them up, I thought I'd bust the speakers because we had an iPod dock, you know, it was played, turned it up, and I thought, oh no, the speakers are gone, this is terrible, I'll just turn it down. The Michael Jackson track, we could turn all the way up, there was no problem at all. But what I thought was sad about that was actually, there's loads of interesting sounds in a Dizzy Rascal record, loads of interesting sounds in a Tiny Temper record, and you can't hear them because you can't actually turn it up.
I can't tell you how many times we do stuff. We'll record strings in this room for a pop track, and the demos, we're tracking to demos, and they're thinking, wow, this sounds fantastic. It's really well done. It's terrific. You put the strings on, and then you hear the final track, and you go, where the hell did that go?
But whose fault is it? I mean, this, you know, if we're all sitting around going, oh, this is fantastic, you know, we you know, essentially what we all want is to hear beautiful, beautiful music. But at some point, that changes. At some point, somebody says you're not going to hear it, and whose fault is it?
Well,
I'm going to go to Mike first.
Because
he's in A&R.
And obviously I sit in the position of being the one that's usually blamed for this. And we were talking about it before, and I think it all ultimately comes down to the artist and what they want, because I certainly find it very difficult to dictate to an artist, you know, what their record should sound like. At the end of the day, it's their art. They're the ones that are creating this, and they're making it for themselves. Well, they're making it for an audience, but they're making it to be with for the rest of their lives. And I definitely think I should stand behind that artist. That's why we got involved with them, as long as they're not doing anything too reckless. And certain artists, you know, a number of artists that I'm working with at the moment are going back to very traditional ways of making albums. They're recording on 2-inch tape, they're working with slightly more old school producers, and they're agonizing about the fidelity of sound right across their records. And this is both young artists. In fact, the Stripes who are going to play later on, they're working with Chris Thomas, and they're working on 2-inch tape, and it's a very traditional way of making music, and they care passionately about the sound of their music. And yet there are other people I work with that have got a very different approach. You know, they're making music largely on their laptops, essentially taking beats that they've sampled, often sampled off YouTube, or sort of like the lowest fidelity, and building up tracks. And they aren't particularly concerned about the sound quality. They're just interested in creating, you know, an interesting sounding piece of music.
Sorry, I've got a terrible cough. But can you do something about if you make a track like that, so you make it quite lo-fi? Is there something that you can do? And I think this is probably a question for actually YouTube maybe all of you. But is there anything you can do to make that sound better? I mean, you know, if you wanted to turn that up and make it something more interesting to somebody's ears, can you do that after you've finished, after that has been handed in?
Yeah, it depends on what stage you get involved. I mean, if it's for mixing, you can certainly improve the quality of it. A low quality tracking, as long as there's certain things in there which sound okay.
If you get a low res MP3 and I say, please Ben, save me. You know,
if it's just an MP3, there's not a lot.
I know, I'm actually in a situation where we've gone back to an artist and said, we want to do a repack on your album. Can you come up with 6 or 7 new tracks? And they've obviously gone back into the vaults and gone, oh my God, I can't possibly write 6 or 7 new songs. And gone around, come up with ideas and sent some stuff back to us and listened to it and going, yeah, that sounds good, that sounds good. Oh my God, that sounds amazing. And that was an MP3 from 7 years ago that was an outtake from their first album. I went, great, well, that's great, yeah, we should work on that. And they went, yeah, well, I'm afraid it just exists as this one little tiny MP3 file. And the interesting thing is, the other tracks are actually recorded and quite lush and great, but the track we're all really excited about is actually this quite poor audio quality track. But because the performance on that track is exceptional, there's something about the way the artist is singing on that is amazing. We've got really excited about this actually quite low fidelity recording. And all of the well-recorded tracks, we've gone, yeah, that's all right, that's all right.
But then isn't that the point about radio, that if you get a really great record, it doesn't really matter if it sounds rubbish? Is that the point?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, there's an analogy with photography, for instance. You go to, nowadays everyone has a camera, usually on their phone, and the secret of getting a good photo is to be there to get at the right spot, to get the right image, and the light happens to be right and it looks great, and you can take a photo on your iPhone and look great. If this bloke's standing next to you and he's got a Hasselblad with the right lens on it in the medium format, it's going to look really great, and then nobody's going to want yours. But So but it's still a matter of capturing it. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It's the trick. I mean, the job for us as engineers and producers is to be the people there with the good quality stuff to make it sound as good.
There's a hard thing because sometimes, you know, there's a certain expectations because ultimately in A&R you have to sell this music, and sometimes that's where it starts to get overcooked. I mean, there's plenty of great sounding, great tracks from 70s, 80s that would get sent back nowadays.
They're not bright enough.
Because they're not bright enough, it's not punchy enough, and stuff that sold millions would be sent back and say, can we just need a few tweaks?
Well, then, so do we have to accept that this is fashion? That we're at a point in musical culture that actually we want a different sound than we did want?
Some of the sound is out of the control of the A&R and the producing fraternity, I'm afraid, because we're listening to lossy codecs. I have the lovely Bob Stewart to thank for a very simple demonstration that shows if you encode something and then convert that encode back to the original, you're amazed when you compare the two how much is actually removed. An MP3 128 does take a lot out of the file. And all that finesse you put into it, those lush strings that Jonathan mentioned, if they're low enough down, MP3 will say, not important enough, let's just delete that. And it's sad that we've got all this great artistic intent, and one of the things that Dolby tries to do is preserve the artistic intent with some of our lossy formats and some of our HD formats. We've got to have good stuff coming in, and that's what we hope the studios present, where it hasn't been, as you called it, overcooked and brought up to the highest level.
But it's the way, if you imagine how people used to listen to music, I know it was a joke that I was making about the idea of sitting in a darkened room listening to beautiful speakers and stuff like that. But people did used to, buy a record, look at it, pore over it, and listen to it, and not actually do anything else at the same time. They weren't kind of saying, "This is my jam," tweeting the fact that they were kind of listening to it at the time. They just did it and maybe invited one other person in. So the way that we listen to music, it's obviously going to have an effect on the music that we hear, because we don't concentrate in that way. So have you found that the way that we listen to the music has had an effect on the A&R process? I mean, do you find, for instance, Ben, that people say, you know what, don't worry about the mixing too much, mate, just whack it out?
I find that people, it varies hugely. I will get some artists, generally the younger ones, who aren't that worried about sound, who only want, I'll send them mixes that I've spent 2 days trying to get sounding as great as possible. They'll listen to them on their laptop speakers and say, can you turn me up a bit? And which is, that's the way it goes.
Do you say anything to them when they do that? I mean, do you say, do you want to borrow my speakers?
I encourage them to listen to it somewhere else, yeah. But it's, a lot of the time, they're not interested in that. They want the instant hit. And a lot of the time, as Mike says, artists need to stand up for themselves and need to know what they're talking about in these scenarios.
The A&R man comes down at the studio a lot of the time, and the band of the A&R man will always go, "I'll put it on the biggies," and it's just like they want it. There's always that joke about listening to music at A&R volume, because you come in, turn it up as loud as possible, and goes, "This is great," and they don't actually want to listen to it as you should be listening through the small speakers on top, And I know, some producers who are not necessarily my favourite producers will record at ear-shrieking volume, and yet the producers I really like working with work at a very, very sensible level. But at the end of the day, it's down to that drug-like excitement that you get from listening to music at volume. And I think people are used to listening to music at volume all the time, right inside your ear, turned up high, listening to very compressed, intense music. And when you're making records to try and compete with what's going on at Radio 1 at the moment, or what's going on at any sort of chart-orientated radio station, it's tough to sort of like go, well, we're going to make something smoother and more sophisticated.
Yeah. But if you listen to it on a small portable device that hasn't got the headroom or the battery power to actually drive the amplifier in such a clean way, you're going to get awfully clipped sounds if you start to drive it louder and louder. Yeah. And if it comes from a compressed format, because that's how you were delivered it digitally, you're on a hiding to nowhere at that point. So there's got to be this education that we start to push out. like there was the education around HD TV. Those 4 little characters meant something. And if you weren't technically savvy, you weren't quite sure what, but you kind of had to have it. And I'm sure we need HD audio to have this benchmark.
Well, then, I mean, that seems to me that it's almost that you're talking about marketing. I mean, from judging from our conversation, essentially what has happened for a while was that as we were looking at the way that we listen to music, for a while actually you couldn't hear it very well. You couldn't, you know, the mobile devices weren't good enough, the laptop things weren't good enough, the headphones weren't good enough. Things seem to be changing a little bit. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes. The only reason that we're listening to MP3s is because that was what we could, that's what could be disseminated easily at the time and the bandwidth that was available. If you think back to 10 years ago when we had dial-up internet connections and or 15 years ago, when we all had dial-up internet connections and everything took ages to download. You had you might have had an iPod and it might have been 2 gig, maybe. Yeah. Nowadays we're way beyond that. So this is a hangover from that period. In 10 years' time, the idea that we'd listen to something because it used less memory will be ridiculous.
So basically, would you call this a kind of blip then, while we're trying to catch up?
Well, I think audio terminology is terrible. I mean, I really do. I mean, I think your 192 kps and your 24-bit, keep that within the industry. That means something to us. But to the consumer, it just confuses and doesn't help at all. And I think, HD audio, great, or whatever. I mean, I'd love A&R to say, well, why can't we standardise the mixers we send you? Why don't we just call them, I don't know, HMC, one for the home, one for the mobile, one for the car, right? Fantastic. We'll do those 3 formats, and if they want 4th one for radio, great. Have your radio mix.
We still ask you to deliver one.
Yeah, that's right.
You're right.
But you've got to find a way of cutting through this confusion.
Because they just read the number and they don't look at the format and they say, well, 192 must be better than 64. And what does that actually mean?
Well, yeah, and also it's just numbers. When you you could just talk about marketing. But if you think about now that we've got different formats, I mean, one of the people who was talked to, a couple of people mentioned FLAC, which I was quite surprised about, but then it was incompatible with how she wanted to listen to it. And you've got the idea of HD audio, Blu-ray audio. Neil Young's got Pono service, Aura Stream. So, do you think essentially that now we've got to a point where convenience and quality can coexist? It's just that no one knows about it.
Yes, we have. We have got to that point where convenience and quality can live. There's a little bit to catch up with the delivery mechanism. We've got a great example of a service that delivers classical music, so it's got a ready audience. It's coming out of Japan. It uses a Dolby True HD, which is like FLAC format, and it delivers surround sound 96K 24-bit. Sorry to say that, but that's the background. That's the background to it. But you could just call it HD audio to the consumer. I mean, it's sold on its merits of quality.
The customer just wants trust that we care.
Yes.
And we're delivering a quality product to the shop.
Yes.
I mean, that's what mastering for iTunes is about.
Yeah, I was interested to come on to that actually, because that was kind of demoed for the labels here, wasn't it?
Yeah,
just a couple of weeks ago, very successfully. And basically, the idea for mastered for iTunes was that essentially classical recordings were played here on the original studio master, and then in the mastered for iTunes format, and no one could tell the difference.
But mastered
really,
for
could
iTunes.
You?
I actually wasn't at that test, but I've done a test, and it's really impressive.
So is classical going to lead the way then, given the fact that, I mean, a couple of people even said that they would rather listen to classical in a better format?
Classical's always driven audio fidelity. I mean, digital was all to do with classical development. Yeah. But Master for iTunes is what's interesting about that is really just saying, care about it before you bring it to the shop, like anyone who delivers a product.
Because the delivered format is still a lossy codec.
Yeah.
And it's nothing special. It's
you can have terrible sounding stuff that's still mastered for iTunes.
Yeah.
Just as if you have good stuff.
Oh yeah. No, the quality of the audio doesn't determine whether or not it's any good.
That's right. You could play it back on a little cheap laptop and it still sounds.
It's encouraging care, but encouraging care was what was successful at that test, because you were hearing carefully mastered things for the shop.
Yeah. Do you think that we're all here, people are interested in music, you work in music. Do you think in the end that actually we're being a bit snobby that there's an enormous audience out there that don't care about things quite in that intricate way, that would never, even if when they could have done, listen to enormous speakers and to Sade, on their enormous speakers in a darkened room. That they just want to hear something and they want to hear something quick.
I mean, I came of age listening to music. I grew up listening to Radio Luxembourg, and which is one of the, I don't know if many of you can remember Radio Luxembourg, but you'd be listening to a radio station that would essentially be disappearing off over there, and then would suddenly come back in again, and you'd be getting really excited, and then it would go, and you'd do like that. So, but it didn't matter because I loved the DJs on the station. I loved the music that they played, and I didn't really care about what it sounded like. I just wanted to hear those songs, and I just wanted to hear those voices. And I also came of age when punk rock happened, which again was probably not a time of, I mean, obviously some incredible sounding records being made at that time, but not necessarily of the highest fidelity. And even now when I've got an artist going into the studio, the thing I want most is a producer that can deliver me a performance from that artist that's really remarkable. If they can make it sound great, fantastic, and that's my ideal. Usually you get a great producer and a great engineer working hand in hand, and the producer comes up with brilliant suggestions, puts the band in the right frame of mind to make great music, and the engineer captures it beautifully. But if I had to shoot one of them, I'd shoot the engineer, because at the end of the day, I want to get the performance out of the artist, and if it isn't captured beautifully, I can deal with that, because if I've got an okay performance that sounds amazing, ain't going to sell a record. It's all about the performance that you can get from that artist. Yeah. And I think that's the way the general public thinks about it. It's how good you sing, it's how well you play, it's how good the song is. That's what matters.
Do you think that we're then, the idea of that some people, it's a completely normal idea that some people shop at Primark, some people shop at Prada. Are we going to end up with a kind of idea that some people will pay a premium for kind of posh tracks and less so for the kind of less beautiful audio version?
You have that already. People will pay a premium. They'll have a Lin streaming around their house, and then the middle classes will have Sonos streaming around the house. And then there's obviously streaming speakers that are coming onto the market now at about £100 or less. And I'm sure, so yeah, absolutely, I think that exists already.
But it's quite interesting, isn't it, what people will pay for, given that some of the people that were speaking, there was the bloke saying, it was £80 for speakers, and that was a bit much. And yet, what we're finding is that people will pay more and more for headphones.
And pay £700 for an HD telly.
Yeah. So how do you, that's what's quite interesting about that, is how do you alter people's perceptions? Headphones I've always understood because you look good in a, there's a fashion element, isn't it? You look good in a pair of good headphones. Whereas, if it's just speakers, they're just speakers and they're never very pretty, are they?
But we could bring up the bass line, couldn't we? We could bring up the bottom.
Turn the bass up.
No, not the bass. We could bring up the lowest quality first as an education process to get people used to higher quality, so that it's a given that you get some quality and capture everything that might come about. Capture the performance, because if that gets encoded and sadly re-encoded again sometimes, and then delivered to a small portable phone with cheesy, $1 headphones, you won't really hear the performance. You just associate it through the band name and song title, probably.
Yeah. I agree.
I think the performance is one thing and is vital, as Mike says, and some bands can do it and some bands can't. I mean, that's just the nature of making music. The thing that we have a control over and the thing that we need to be careful of is the longevity of our industry based on what we're willing to invest in it. I think the music industry has gone through a crisis of confidence in the last 10 years. I regularly get approached to do albums with exciting new bands who can perform really, really well at a budget which is so low that you don't actually, if they can perform really, really well in a week in a studio and it's done, then it'll sound fine. Yeah. But the budget is 20 grand for making an album, and it's like the engineer's already been shot.
And possibly the band.
Yeah, exactly. So, we have to be in a position where, and
you're saying we need to spend more money on you. We need
just give me more money. I mean, we have to be in a position where, if you do that, if you put a band in with that sort of investment, you might get one song. or maybe 2 songs, which will be great, and then the rest of the album won't be, because they won't have the time to develop, and they won't have the time to... You'll only be getting to know each other as a producer and an artist by the end of the session. And so they might have a couple of songs which are great, but there'll be 4 or 5 songs in there which given time and a bit of work, not much more, a bit more, and a bit more pre-planning, could turn into even better songs. But you'll never get them.
But equally, that's a really decisive way of recording, because actually, you know, if you've got 8 really well-recorded single tracks on a multi-track, you know, that can sound really full and fat. You know, you can get there very quickly. And what's happening is because of the way they work in the studio, we get delivered 88 multi-tracks, which can sound really thin. Everything's fighting for the same space rather than being crafted from the low to the highs in a very musical, balanced way.
But the reason for that is there's nobody telling them or nobody helping them to make decisions and to make... I get more work mixing at the moment than I do production, because production is deemed to be expensive. Mixing, on the other hand, is deemed to be fairly cheap. I've never quite understood this, but so I will often get given a very poorly recorded set of 90 tracks for each song, which I then have to kind of resurrect into some vague sort of, and there's no element of performance in it whatsoever, and I have to sort of kind of make that into something which sounds acceptable. Now, if I'd had, and I might get paid some money to do that, if I'd had the same amount of money and the band in the studio for a day, and not worried about mixing it, it'd be way better. But because by the time it gets to me, it's too late. You know, it's like if it's for mixing, and they've already recorded it, and they've spent, I don't know how much money they might have spent on recording it. It doesn't sound like they've spent a lot.
It's true, because so much of the emphasis on audio quality tends to be on the mastering, on the 192
got to be at the start.
Whatever. But actually, it's here.
In the
where you focus, where you save your money, just by focusing and being decisive.
And that's what I talk...
just doing it simply.
Yeah, that's what I mean about long-term investment in it, because the moment, if you can't get a budget for a studio which is more than 400 quid a day, the studios are all, the expertise in the studios is drifting away. The quality of the studios is drifting away. They can't afford to invest in things or even fix stuff.
Okay, listen, I want to, just really quickly go on, because I want you to finish off that point, but I'm just going to say that I'm going to throw it open to the audience soon, so you need to think of your questions. Mike's going to finish off.
I just wanted to argue back a little bit of devil's advocate.
Spend your money, Mike.
Because we have actually got the Stripes in a £350 a day studio. But so many records that I absolutely love were made for 20 grand, or made for a relatively cheap amount of money 20, 30 years ago, which would argue against what you're saying. Those records have survived, and I listen to them and I care about them.
But were they made by bands who had spent a lot of time
rehearsing? They were made by bands who knew what they were doing, went into a studio and cut it fast. I think that's the reason I feel confident about putting the Stripes into a £350 a day studio. Because I know that they can go in, do it fast, and deliver.
No, I'm not saying that is a bad thing at all. What I'm saying is that a lot of bands aren't given that opportunity to even get to that stage where they gig enough or rehearse enough, and they're not given the confidence to do that.
But you two guys spend a long time policing this end of the chain, the creation end of the chain. Do you spend any time policing the formats that it's delivered in, or do you just say, so long as somebody is sending me money for a streaming service, you don't actually listen to it and do any form of complaints or quality control, I suppose?
I guess the closest I get to that, I do actually mix, usually for 2 formats. I'll mix for radio and I'll mix for an album.
Because radio, of course, is always compressed. It has to be to stop the
absolutely.
transmitters crashing.
And I'm very conscious of making albums that people can listen to and listen to for... You know, to be honest, I don't think a record should be longer than 40 minutes long.
Quite right.
Quite love them if they're 30 minutes long. But you want it to be a great listening experience. Yes. And as soon as you finish listening to it, you just want to put it straight back on again. Yeah. And I think if you were to do that entirely with radio tracks, you know, it's an almost unbearable experience. How people can listen to now, that's what I call music.
Yeah, I mean, we just listen to Revolver. Everyone needs a George Harrison bit, don't they? Just to relax. Do we have questions from the audience? Hello, cameraman, you're taking my photo. There was one there, just look. Yep. Hello. Do you want to introduce yourself before you ask?
It's Brian Boyd, I'm a journalist based in Dublin. If we accept that Beats changed everything, would you, my opinion would be that the huge success of Beats was not down to the audio quality, fidelity, etc. It was down to the fact that it was the Dr. Dre name. Beats by Sheryl Crow would have shifted about 8 units.
That's mean.
Looking then into the future, if you're talking about migrating people towards better audio experience, would it not be an idea to save the geek speak and to go and get a credible artist to front the campaign for you? Are we in an era of the celebrity headphone? Are we looking at the One Direction headphone coming out for the younger generation?
It doesn't just have to be about the artist headphone. We appreciate what Beats have done. Certainly at Dolby we appreciate what Beats have done because it's taught a whole youth that you can go out and buy headphones and make a change which improves the quality of your listening experience. We don't use them in our tests because we prefer a flatter playback experience, but that's a different story. But they were a fashion item, weren't the Beats? And they still are a fashion item. And as Miranda said, you look cool in them. I quote you on that phrase. I think artist endorsements about quality services would work just as well. You could picture Quincy Jones coming on and advertising a jazz service that says, this is the highest fidelity audio I've ever heard. Believe me, listen to it. You'd at least listen to it. I would.
But you know, I find it's interesting because like, in sports, they always go back down to grassroots. And I actually think encouraging listening is an extraordinarily important part of developing the future audience. I mean, I'm actually, in 2 months, I've actually been working on this, just trying to see if I can do a listening club for kids in our local village. And there's loads of record clubs creeping up in London, just like book clubs. And I just thought, well, can we just get them to, you can watch 3 or 4 hours of telly at a go. Let's just try 45 minutes of just sitting in a room and not feeling self-conscious about listening in a group way. And because there's something quite focusing when you're all together. And
how did they react? Because, I mean, my initial reaction would be that they would then be listening, but also on the phones at the same time.
Well, that's the whole point. This is why it's taken us a while to actually get the format sort of right. And it is mobiles off. Yeah. And it is just sat down. We're going to do vinyl, just because there's something about actually physically putting something on. We should sort of focus. It's a ritual. Yeah, it's like lighting the candle. And then, and we'll see. We'll try it out. But I do think there's something in that.
Teaching people to
make something it's enjoyable.
Yeah, but it is. That feels like an incredible luxury. And it shouldn't be. It should be a luxury that's easily available to absolutely everybody. But to suggest to somebody, today, sit down at home and listen to a record for 40 minutes, turn off all your electrical equipment. Most people would just go, I couldn't possibly do that. In the same way that if you say to somebody, what you need to do today is meditate for 40 minutes, they'll just laugh in your face and go, I haven't.
And I am going to make sure I've got a decent, good quality hi-fi.
But yeah, they'll quite happily disappear and lose themselves in Dexter for an hour.
But I mean, to go back to the question, what about the idea that a kind of celebrity or some kind of mark of quality would therefore encourage people to listen?
Well, it does, obviously. Bob Marley endorsed headphones, bizarre as that may seem. Absolutely, they sell. Quincy Jones headphones sell. Dre headphones sell.
But that's headphones. I mean, that's a piece of, it's something
but
you
it's
can
still
hold.
leading you back to this artist who you trust to give you high fidelity recordings is endorsing this piece of equipment that will apparently turn your crappy MP3 file into something that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
They would trust the Abbey Road brand.
Yeah.
They would trust that to the end of the world. If you said this is good and actually other stuff you might hear might not be as good.
But it's interesting, isn't it? There's actually a market for people to put processors on top of your music playing to make it sound better, to make an expensive master
Put your hand up, Jojo.
Well, we are demonstrating that at the back of the room.
Yeah, which has been demonstrated at the back of the room.
But yeah, an artist-endorsed streaming service, I think, is definitely a great. Then obviously we got that with what Neil Young is doing. But I mean, it is also a challenge though that you've sort of with Sonos, which is I think a huge step forward and fabulous. But I have got the Sonos mono speaker system in the corner of the kitchen, competing with a blender and kids and all the noises of the kitchen. So it's obviously turned up loud, so it's destroying sound quality as it goes.
Yes, over there. Sorry, you're right in my eye line, so I saw you.
Sorry, Aidan Butler is my name, from Dublin again, from radio. I'm probably looking around, probably one of the old grey-haired fellas here who do remember hi-fi and all the rest. But even in those days, there was crappy hi-fi. I mean, we all remember the little pie with the 2 biscuit tins that were pretending to be speakers. But that didn't stop the people in here recording good stuff for medium, even sort of or high-end stereos. So why should we now sort of say, well, look, this is a new world we have to create for an MP3. The guys in here created a desire amongst people like me. I came from a little town outside Dublin. My dad bought the first stereo in the town.
Wow.
And people walked 1.5 miles out of the town to come and play the record on my stereo to hear what it was like. That's what we need to do. We need to create, we need the industry to say, we are going to give you quality.
Yes.
It's there. You might not be able to afford £80 this week, but if you get a good job, it's on the future. We can now go back to listen to vinyls, we can go back to listen to CDs recorded 20 years ago and appreciate them now. Kids now going back listening to their MP3s, what they're getting now or they're downloading now, we know that when they get upwardly mobile or whatever, they're going to listen, they're literally going to dump them, because if we teach them right and if we encourage them to listen right, we have a future. But if we just go the way we are at the moment, we're in trouble.
I do think it's really important to put, there is obviously the tone of the conversation is that we're just making music for radio that's of a low fidelity. The majority of recordings, certainly that we've got underway at Mercury at the moment, are in studios that are not a million miles different to this. We're still making high quality recordings that we think are going to stand the test of time. We're spending way more than £20,000 on them, much to the horror of the people that are looking after the budgets. But I agree, there is nothing, it's the one thing I wouldn't compromise is the money that we spend on making the records. I always feel that every penny that you put into making a great record is a penny that you don't have to put into marketing. The best marketing tool you can possibly have is a brilliant record. So I'd always invest all of the money into making the record as good as possible. And the majority of stuff that we're doing is in good studios with great producers, and we're getting the best possible sounds that we can.
But then everyone listens to it on YouTube, don't you get hacked off?
Not really, no, because because it's the opportunity is there for it's a bit like sending your kids off to an expensive school and then they go and do a shitty job or whatever. You're giving people the opportunity, you're giving them the resources. Not that I'm speaking personal experience.
They'll be all right.
I know. No, but the notion that you basically created something and you're giving people the option. If I create a low quality sound recording, that's all it is. If I create something fantastic, it can be listened to in the beauty of your home on fabulous speaker systems, and you can absolutely luxuriate in it. Or, most likely, you'll be running around like a mad fool with your headphones on doing 15 million different things at the same time, listening to a very low-res file, but still getting hugely excited because the song's great.
But if you are listening on a very good hi-fi, it is more enjoyable. It is. When it's on a good, well-balanced track,
I agree.
not overcooked.
Yeah. But who's got the time?
Nope.
That's the problem we live in.
Lots of questions. This is great.
Everybody's got the time.
Right, I'm going to sit from this side because you're waving. You're waving, so you're really keen, and then I'll move across. I have a feeling we're going to be told off now.
Rob Proctor, Audio Boo, unashamedly digital, I'm afraid. Kids buy brands, not music. Kids listen to it on their mobile phone. If you want to solve the problem, you've got to speak to Pete, and you've got to produce mobile phones with chipsets with high quality, because that's where everybody listens to music. You can have vinyl, you can have the wonderful experience, the great speakers. Kids don't give a monkeys. They listen to it on their mobile phone. Sort out the handset manufacturers, then you've got half a chance.
From our point of view, we still have to make the music to the highest quality, because if the high quality recording doesn't exist, it's easy to make a high quality recording down to a low res to listen to on a crap chipset on a phone. But if it doesn't exist as a high quality, it doesn't exist. That's the same that Mike said.
I mean, Dolby makes a huge part of its living making a very good lossy codec. It's in lots of the devices. the people that are delivering the content. Oh, sorry, I'll say something more provocative.
You're just starting a riot, aren't you,
Yeah.
JJ?
It is easy to, if you just care and preserve the value of the artistic intent, irrespective of whether it was 5 bob or 20,000 or whatever you spent on it, and the great mixing that could happen. If you preserve that intent,
but
the devices could
it's
do
an
it.
interesting-
They could do it quite
But it's
easily.
going to be more revealing in a good chipset, whether it's been badly crunched and all that sort of stuff.
But
So
it's,
there is an onus
but
on
it's also interesting.
quality.
That point, I think, is very interesting, given that the first point that you made was kids buy brands, not music. I mean, that's a separate point. But then also, I mean, perhaps what we should have here, as well as all you lovely people, is somebody who makes mobile phones, and we can attack them.
But he's only going to make what the public want, and what do the public want? A very, very cheap music player.
That lasts 12 hours, so the battery's running in, you know, the amp's running in low power mode,
So
so it's never going to do it.
You know, I would love, you know, Apple to be making great high fidelity music players, but they'll make what people want and sell it at a price that they can get for it. And I think, you know, and they aren't remotely interested in the music.
But isn't the research that Pete just pointed to saying that they actually do want higher quality?
There's an opportunity being created by the film studios, by the games makers, creators, that's bringing multi-channel audio into those devices and creating an install base through the devices, but also in the living room. So I think you're absolutely right. Again, it's back to that self-fulfilling prophecy. There's an acceptance that the quality of sound doesn't matter, therefore why would we spend time worrying about it?
I think people, I'm
It's
not wanting to
changing.
speak for the kids. I think that a lot of them listen to stuff on poor quality stuff, but they would much rather listen to it on better.
When they
Doesn't
hear
mean they can
better, they
afford
want
it.
better.
Okay.
But they have to
Hang on,
hear
no,
it.
there's a lot of questions. I do want to get to them, so I'm going to ask. Yes, you. Yes, let's have a female.
Probably loud enough, but okay. Thank you. Hi, Erica Baznicki from Pro Sound News Europe. We just heard how kids buy brands, and yet I think possibly, you know, we're talking about chipsets and, you know, sample rates and all these things which kids don't necessarily care about. Would it not make sense maybe to market a new file format, because MP3 is basically synonymous with music, and I don't know if kids necessarily care about the format per se, they just want the song, and perhaps the emphasis should be on marketing rather than a product. Headphones aren't going to make a difference necessarily. Your player can make a difference, but is there not an argument for simplifying the technology so that they understand that actually MP3 is bad, this format is good, and can we not market that rather than, you know, sort of preaching about sound quality, because that's probably going to go over the head of most people, I would assume.
Dolby does that all its day, but there are people who still don't understand formats. They just see them as strings of characters, and I'm sure we need something higher level around.
So the idea of HD audio.
Or whatever, I just made that up on the spot.
Yeah.
Also, I'd love to, just being devil's advocate a little bit, I'd love to take issue with MP3 being bad. You know, people listen to music now more than they've ever done before. Everyone is walking around with a record collection in their pocket. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Obviously, I would love it to be a fantastic high-fidelity record collection in their pocket, but I'm delighted they're listening to music all the time, and wherever they go, they're listening to music.
I completely agree. I mean, this, you know, we listen to
And that wouldn't have
AACs.
happened without MP3s, simple as that.
No, we were comparing AACs. That is good. What a lot of the issues, what we're talking about, is people just driving it too hard before it reaches the format itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. We've got a mic. Here it is. There's a mic here. Look, coming from Mike.
A selling point for really high-res, high sample rate stuff is you can listen to it louder without your ears getting tired. And that surely will appeal to the new generation. And conjecture, you've talked about the people who have listened to nothing but MP3 and can't hear anything, therefore can't hear the improvement when you go to high res. I would think maybe a year or so is about a long enough retraining time from personal experience, going from CD to hearing high res and then thinking, how on earth did I listen to that stuff before?
You're exactly right. It's about training the people's ears to know what to listen to.
Not hearing the difference.
Maybe we need music clubs in schools.
There you go.
Yeah. That's going to happen under this covenant, isn't it? Right, okay, yes. Hello? Yeah, you've got a big gob? All right.
Hi, I'm Sean Hannum. I edit ERT, which is a magazine for retailers, technology retailers. Hasn't retail got a part to play? Surely, because we were talking about earlier, 50s, 60s. You had hi-fi stores, didn't you? Guys would, get their first amp, go into a store, listen to Led Zeppelin or, Dark Side of the Moon, God forbid, and then, buy a hi-fi. But now, where can you buy it? Independent specialist hi-fi retailers are dwindling. There's nowhere to kind of give people that theatre. HMV is basically in demise. People don't go in. They go into independent record stores, but there's not that merging of independent stores where you could go in, listen to a record on decent headphones, on decent gear. So that's part of the problem, isn't it? People are buying their electrical goods off the internet. So where are you going to get that education to listen to hi-fi?
Exactly the problem. You can see through the John Lewis store window that an HD telly has got kind of a good picture. You can see that without even going in the store, but you can't listen to how poor the sound is out of most TVs today because they've got two tiny little 1-inch speakers pointing backwards. And education does come into it time and time again. Nobody is going to go into even richer sounds and allow you to switch an amp on because they're all boxed up in the back. And it is a big, big problem. You can come down to the Dolby Studios in Soho if you want to listen to good sound. It's free and cheaper than coming here.
Right. Yes, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Hi there. Anthony Walker from an organisation called Intellect. We actually represent some of these CE manufacturers, the device manufacturers. Coming back to this point about MP3s, the reason MP3s are so compressed isn't the device, isn't the chipset, it's the bandwidth. MP3 is a dial-up technology. And we're no longer in a dial-up age. We're in an age of fibre, and we've just had the 4G auctions. And mobile operators, device manufacturers, they want to be able to sell that 4G, they want to be able to sell that next generation of services, and they want quality, and they want fidelity. So I think now is absolutely the time to start making this shift.
It is absolutely the time. We've had all of the UK operators in saying, Dolby, please give me something to fill my pipes to justify that stupid amount we spent on the 4G license. And, there are some great lossless formats that could be out there. It just requires some bravery from some of the service providers to actually deploy them. Of course, there is a slight danger. If you start deploying lossless, you're giving away some of the crown jewels if you're not protecting that somehow. And that brings around that awful word, DRM again. And I'm not going to be the one that say we all need DRM because I'll sound like a really old fogey. But all of that effort that goes in to curating, mixing, selling and maintaining these artists, you can't just keep giving away lossless. I mean, that's one of the great things about MP3. It's hardly worth anything because it's only about 20% of the original file. Lossless is everything. And we do need to think about how we do that. Spotify gets around it because they chop up the file differently. That's getting into technology.
Yes, and then yes.
Okay, Neil Corwick, the Daily Telegraph.
Hello, Neil.
People are, as we've established, they're listening on mobile phones, they're listening on headphones, they're prepared to pay for high-end headphones. Is there any chance that the music industry, as the provider of that, will try and push forward a lossless, a new format, a replacement to MP3? Because the music industry altogether decided on CDs. They decided on the rate of digital back in like 1983, 1984. The big companies got together. There was more of them to get together, and they decided that. And so that you would at least have MP3 and MP10, something you can all say. And every time a One Direction record comes out, you can listen to it in MP3, or you can listen to it in HD1. But that requires the industry itself to do that. Is there any chance that that's going to happen?
I think that new format is amongst us and is growing every day, and it's streaming. I think that the notion of owning music is gradually going to be eroded in the same way that owning TV programs or owning books. I think we're moving to a cloud-based future, and I think in 10, 15 years' time, everybody will be consuming music in that fashion. And that's the way, I genuinely think that's the way that the music industry is going to grow dramatically.
And then
and sorted. So.
But then that requires the music industry getting together with the streaming services to do that.
Yeah. And streaming lossy is fine in the central London. It's rubbish where I live. So you know there are some.
And that's why it's going to take.
Some
it's
time.
going to take some time.
But I'm talking about an iterative process where you just. And by the way, for everybody that's out there, most services these days are actually delivering MPEG-4, although we say MPEG-3. But you could take the MPEG-4 up to above what the master for iTunes spec is, because it's only 256k. You could go well up to 512 and it not affect anything. Sorry, numbers.
Sorry, it just makes me laugh. Yeah, go on. Where's the mic? Go on, one more. Mike.
At the front.
Sorry, right down the front.
Mike.
You're nearly done. Well done, Mike.
Hi, I'm Bob Stewart from Meridian. So unashamedly care a lot about reproducing sound, and for my sins, maybe I should admit this, I'm helping Neil with his Pono project. We care a lot about sound quality, and I think you guys do too. And I'm really interested in some of the points you're making about how young people listen. I believe we're training our young people not to listen to the right things. If you listen to MP3, you don't know any better. You know, let's forget the music industry. My children, they grew up as musicians, playing instruments, piano, violin, and so on. But they would go back to their rooms and listen to an iPod with a 1-inch speaker. And they didn't even understand until I showed them, or their friends, that reproduced sound could actually be like the real thing. They have no connection between reproduced sound and the real thing. And worse than that, we're playing MP3s to a generation. I don't know how many of you know about neuroscience and the psychoacoustics of this, but the way the ear develops, the way it trains itself, the way the neurological connections are made goes on till the age of 15. Now we all grew up in an era when there wasn't MP3, when the only sounds we could hear were either AM radio with no high frequencies or real sounds with high frequencies. And you train someone's ears, as Peter has said, for year and year and year with MP3 type sounds, with blurred sounds. That's all they come to expect.
Yep.
And it takes a while to unlearn it. And you have to make the archive for the next generation. These beautiful recordings. Why else are we going back to these older recordings, these great recordings that sound so much better, maybe sometimes, than things that are currently made? Of course there's great recordings made today, but you have to do it. You have to do it.
You have to maintain the quality, absolutely. Yeah.
I better stop because
That's all right. So look, I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then that is it. So because, oh look, you just put your hand up. You can't just put your hand up now when I've just seen the 2 people there. That's no good. That's bad form. Right at the back.
He's got a laptop as well.
Okay.
Hi there, Chris Baird from Music Ally. A bit more of a light-hearted question, really. Audio recorded onto 3D printed vinyl, innovation or slipping into regression?
I saw that. Yeah, that looks amazing.
Nice one.
I don't know, does it sound any good? Oh, yeah, regression.
Yeah. That's an interesting one.
I mean, we hark back to vinyl.
It's a novelty.
Vinyl was good for its time, but it wasn't perfect. The guys here could have outdone vinyl all the time. And the one slip back was cassette, which was a bit nasty.
I quite like cassettes, so you could throw them on the floor.
Yeah. Well, it made Dolby lots of money with the button because we had to make something better. CD was good when it came out. And we must, we talk about MP3. It's a 20-year-old technology. What's wrong is the record industry lost the control, or they're no longer the gatekeeper. Yeah. And MP3s should have kind of got better, every 2 years or whatever Moore's law is these days. It should have got better and better and better. It's had a unique place, and Fraunhofer were probably just reaping in the royalties and didn't bother to improve it. And,
I think in many ways MP3s are brilliant. In the way that Mike says is that so many more people listen to so much more music, and that's fantastic. But it's getting people to go up from.
Okay, I don't want to go over the same points more than once because we've done it a bit. Yeah. Yes, and honestly, we have to stop. We've got a band to play. A great band too. Well, yeah. Okay.
I'll be quick to answer.
Hello, I work in one of the classical labels in Universal. It's very interesting hearing about sound quality. I think in the digital realm, choice is a good thing. One of the great things about all these services is you mentioned the fact someone could take an entire record collection in their pocket, which is a very powerful thing. But the need for HD is there, and I think we have to teach people to sort of want to have an HD quality, but there needs to be something accessible. HD files are huge. Most of them, you have 5, you've got a full iPad. So there needs to be something in the middle that's a sort of high quality file, but at the same time is portable, you can take it with you. I've done a lot of work trying to find HD files. You know, the closest I've come to it so far is the Mastered for iTunes version, just purely because it's decent quality, but you can also take it with you. So I think that's quite a powerful thing. But at the same time, you know, I'm a huge fan of streaming services as well, so you can shoot me on the way out. Thank you.
It's fun. No, I don't know what to shoot. Okay. There's no response to that. It was just a really great point.
It was a great point.
Okay, well, I think, unless you're really desperate about your question and you're really desperate about your question, are you desperate? I'm not desperate. Are you desperate?
Go on.
Quickly.
Yeah, go on. You are desperate. Okay. Your final question, and then we are wrapping up.
Quite rightly, you talked earlier about HD TVs. I'm interested in why the film industry has been able to sell HD formats numerous times over, and people have rebought the Star Wars collection God knows how many times. Where was music's Blu-ray moment, and has it gone? That was the question.
Good question.
Sony own
You're
a
right.
lot of the Blu-ray patents. I think that, and Sony have Sony Pictures, and Sony have equipment and Blu-ray players. I think that is one of the answers, that they had it kind of stitched up in the end-to-end play-out. And maybe it's time for Universal to bring out a mobile phone that actually makes calls.
Yeah, but they do have a good record company.
They've got a great record company, sorry. But, you know, maybe a mobile phone by Universal that occasionally makes calls and texts and connects you to Facebook is, sells on its audio quality.
Yeah.
They obviously made a decision that it wasn't going to sell. You know, they could get away with selling cheap audio players because, you know, Sony have Sony Ericsson, which were the phones, and had Sony Walkman, and obviously were the pioneers of portable music. And it made me very frustrated, particularly when I was working at Sony Music, that they threw away that opportunity and that they didn't try and bring in something high. Obviously, that decision was reached that we can make a fantastic markup on HD TV, but we can't really sell this. There isn't the demand there that we know there is for HD TV.
And it's the perception, you know, bright pictures, it's easy to tell if it's out of focus. Yeah. It's a lot harder to make a qualitative judgment about audio because there is an intangibility, and it's also because audio is emotional. Yeah. And that's the big factor.
And it does seem, from my end, that the industry as a whole hasn't really tried to push anything more than MP3s. They've got MP3s, great.
It's just got confusing terminology and numbers.
Because Blu-ray, it seems to me that Blu-ray sold HD TVs and HD Blu-ray players, and the players sold the Bluray. There was like a symbiotic relationship.
Yep.
Well, the record labels haven't had that relationship with Beats or Sonos.
No, we've never brought out a 24-bit CD. You know, nothing's happened.
Pete tried, didn't you, Pete, for many formats?
Well, DVD audio was following DVD video, which is the most successful packaged media format in history. However, SACD was coming out at the same time.
Yep.
And there was a moment that was missed. I think there's another moment.
There is another moment.
Well, I'm going to... We have to stop. We can talk about this for a very long time, as we know, but I like the idea, it's a very nice idea to finish on the fact that there is a moment now that can be taken and grasped, and that people will appreciate music recorded in proper quality in the future because we will make them. So I would like to say thank you very much to you. Absolutely great audience, I must say. And thank you very much to the panel. We're going to usher them off, and then we're going to usher on a fantastic band. So don't move, okay? Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you. Thank you.